woman kept hearing strange scratching noises at night, so she placed a hidden camera in her bedroom, but what she discovered left her terrified. Her name was Emma Carter. She was 32 and lived alone in a small flat. One night, she woke to the sound of faint scratching against her bedroom wall. At first, she thought it was just the pipes or maybe a mouse, but the next night, it happened again. This time, the sound was louder, sharper, like fingernails dragging across plaster. Emma turned on the light and checked every corner, but nothing was there. By midnight, she sat up in bed, staring at the wall, her heart racing. The following morning, Emma bought a motion camera and set it up, aimed directly at the wall where the noise was loudest. When she checked the footage the next day, the wall itself seemed to move like something inside was pushing to get out. What she saw next left her speechless. Emma sat at her kitchen table the next morning, the footage still fresh in her mind. She had expected to see nothing more than shadows, or perhaps a mouse running along the skirting board, something simple she could dismiss with a call to pest control. But instead, she had witnessed her bedroom wall ripple in the dead of night, as though the very plaster was breathing. She replayed the clip over and over, hoping her tired eyes had tricked her. But every time at 3:17 a.m., the movement was undeniable. Her rational mind fought to explain it away. Pipes expanding, vibrations from somewhere else in the building, even the distortion of the cheap camera she had bought. Yet deep down, she knew none of those answers fit. The wall had moved, and something about it left her uneasy. Determined not to jump to conclusions, Emma decided to take a closer look in the daylight. She cleared her bedroom, pulling her bed and chest of drawers away from the wall, revealing a stretch of plaster that hadn't been seen in years. At first, nothing seemed unusual, just faded paint and faint cracks. But as she ran her fingers along the surface, she noticed an irregular patch near the skirting. It sounded hollow when she tapped it, different from the rest of the wall. The spot was small, no larger than a shoebox, but it stood out immediately. She pressed harder and felt a slight give, like something wasn't fully sealed beneath the surface. Curiosity gnawed at her, but she wasn't about to start tearing apart her flat without evidence. That evening, she did what most people do when confronted with something strange. She searched online. She typed in the symptoms: wall moving at night, hollow spot in wall, scratching noises in bedroom. The results were a mix of mundane explanations and wild conspiracy theories. Some suggested rodents or settling foundations, others spun tales about hidden crawl spaces or even structural faults. Yet buried in the search results, Emma stumbled on something that made her pause: stories of hidden rooms and forgotten spaces uncovered inside old buildings across Britain. One article described a couple in Devon who had discovered an entire Victorian room sealed behind a false wall, untouched for more than a century. Another spoke of contractors in London tearing down a partition to find a fireplace bricked up since the Second World War, complete with ration tins and newspapers preserved like time capsules. These were not ghost stories or urban legends, but real discoveries documented in local news. Emma leaned back in her chair, her heart racing. Could her own flat hold a secret like that? She didn't sleep much that night. The scratching returned, faint but insistent, always at the same spot. When the morning came, she called her landlord, pretending she was worried about structural damage. He brushed her off, muttering about old buildings and their quirks. "If it's really bothering you, get a surveyor," he said, clearly uninterested. That was all the permission she needed. Later that week, Emma hired a small local building inspector. His name was Alan, a wiry man in his 50s with decades of experience in old flats. He arrived with a clipboard, a thermal imaging camera, and a no-nonsense attitude. Emma led him straight to the hollow spot in her bedroom. He pressed against the wall, listening with his ear, then took out the thermal camera. The screen lit up in shades of blue and orange, showing temperature differences behind the plaster. Alan frowned. "That's not normal," he muttered. "Looks like there's a cavity behind here, bigger than a simple gap." With Emma's permission, he drilled a tiny inspection hole and inserted a flexible camera scope. Emma watched the live feed on his monitor, expecting to see dust and wood beams. Instead, the lens revealed empty space. And then, unbelievably, the edge of what looked like old wallpaper. Alan pulled back, visibly surprised. "You've got a sealed room back there," he said, shaking his head. "Not just a gap, an actual space that was closed off." For a moment, Emma was speechless, as she thought of all the nights she had sat awake listening to the wall, never realizing there was something beyond it. The inspector explained that during renovations, especially in older blocks, it wasn't uncommon for builders to cover over unused alcoves or even small rooms to modernize the layout. But a sealed room, left hidden for decades, was rare. Alan told her she should inform the landlord, but Emma already knew what his response would be. He didn't care. This was her discovery now. It took another 2 weeks before Emma convinced a friend with some DIY skills to help her carefully open the wall. Together, they cut away the plaster around the hollow patch, peeling back layers of dust and paint until a dark cavity appeared. Bit by bit, the gap widened until they revealed a wooden door frame, its surface scarred with age. The door itself had been covered entirely, locked away from view for generations. When Emma pushed, it creaked, the sound of rusted hinges groaning after decades of silence. Behind the wall was a room frozen in time. It was no bigger than a storage cupboard, but its contents were startling. Against one wall sat an old wooden chair, its legs uneven, a thick layer of dust covering the seat. Nearby was a small table, and on it, a glass bottle, its label faded but still faintly legible, a brand of medicine long discontinued. Scattered across the floor were yellowed newspapers from the 1940s, their headlines about the Blitz and rationing. It was as though someone had bricked up the room during the war and never returned. Emma's hands trembled as she picked up one of the newspapers. The date read 1942. She realized she was the first person to touch these objects in more than 80 years. Her friend whistled softly, shaking his head. "It's like a time capsule," he said. They explored further and found a metal tin tucked into the corner. Inside were letters, carefully folded, written in elegant cursive. Emma read the first few lines and felt a chill run down her spine. They were love letters, signed by a man named Thomas, addressed to someone named Eliza. The letters spoke of separation, of fear during air raids, of longing for a time when they could be together again. These were no staged relics or fabricated props. They were the real words of people who had lived through one of the darkest chapters of history. Emma sat cross-legged on the dusty floor, devouring the letters one by one. Some spoke of hope, others of despair. One, written in a hurried scrawl, mentioned the plan to seal off part of the flat to create a hidden shelter from bombings. Suddenly, everything made sense. The room behind her wall had been a makeshift air raid shelter, bricked up after the war and forgotten as the building changed hands. The discovery shook Emma deeply. What had begun as a terrifying mystery, scratching sounds in the night, a wall that seemed to move, had led to a window into the past. She contacted the local historical society, who confirmed the find was significant. Many improvised shelters from the war had been destroyed or repurposed, but finding one sealed and untouched was rare. Historians visited her flat, carefully documenting the room and its contents. They explained that during the Blitz, when bombs rained down on London and surrounding areas, families often improvised. Some built shelters in gardens, others reinforced basements, and in rare cases, rooms inside homes were bricked up for protection. Word of Emma's discovery spread quickly. Local news reporters came to see the hidden room, snapping photos of the newspapers, the medicine bottle, and the faded love letters. People were fascinated, not because it was paranormal or impossible, but because it was real. A forgotten piece of history uncovered in the middle of an ordinary flat. Neighbors who had lived in the building for decades admitted they had never suspected such a thing existed. One elderly resident even recalled stories from his parents about neighbors who had walled themselves in during the Blitz to survive. For Emma, the experience was transformative. What had begun as fear became fascination, and what seemed like a haunting turned into a reminder of resilience. She donated the letters to the Historical Society, ensuring that Thomas and Eliza's voices would be preserved. The newspapers and objects were cataloged, and the hidden room itself became a small point of pride for the building. Even so, Emma couldn't shake the memory of those first nights, the scratching noises, the strange movements on camera. Perhaps it had been rodents disturbed by the hollow space, or the shifting of old timbers in the bricked-up room. Rational explanations fit more neatly now, yet the unease lingered. She had discovered something remarkable, something rooted in truth, yet the sense of mystery had not entirely vanished. When she lay in bed at night staring at the now open wall, she sometimes imagined she could still hear faint scratching, echoes from another time, as though the past itself had been trying to make itself known.